Shalom! Welcome to another exciting edition of Torah Watchman Show, available to all YouTube subscribers. I hope you've been well. This is Rev ben-Emmett, your humble host here. We're going to begin where we left off for part 3, the root of Karaite history. This is just a brief introduction based on my research, and I've learned a lot. I've really learned a lot. Should I sit on that information that has been peer-reviewed by other documented sources? That would be selfish of me. That would be arrogant of me. I would not do that. So I want to share with you, of anyone that's interested to know a little bit more than you knew before about what is Karaite Judaism. There are so many Jews out there that don't really know anything about it, much less care enough to even think about it. Why? Because if you read the information in the Talmudic writings of medieval rabbis of rabbinical Judaism, they do not paint a very good picture of the Karaite Jews. They treat them as heretics. They treat them as some sort of a peculiar sect that is not even really considered true Jews. Well, I'm going to correct that record in a few others. Please stay with me. I told you before we're going to talk about Karaite Jews and a brief historical summary of their life in the nation of Egypt. I thought it's very fascinating, but a brief review on where I ended part 2. Okay, we talked about Karaite Jews living under the impressive Bolshevik revolution and the Russian Empire. During the time of Lenin, especially in the time of Stalin. Stalin particularly hated the Jewish people. The Karaite Jews were forced to actually almost play dead as a Jew. In other words, they joined up with Khazars and other groups similar to that. In fact, to the point where they were immersed in those communities for so long, just trying to escape anti-Semitism throughout the Russian Empire. And I would say this is probably 17 and 1800s, early 1900s, during that time frame, that they lost their Jewish identity and they started believing the fake story they were telling others just to stay alive, that they actually were descendants of Khazars, which my wife reminded me are a mixed bag of ethnic people from the Caucasus, okay, not Turks. Well, we have that being said, but we did not talk about Karaites living in Egypt. I'm going to read you some information from historians. This is not my opinion, and I will always break away if I'm providing my opinion instead of as your Jewish historian news reporter. Well, the origins of the small Karaite sect, we've always been a minority at some point. In the 9th century, Karaite Jews were identified in ancient Mesopotamia, which was known as Babylon, which is known as Basra, Iraq. Okay, so you hear about Iraqi Jews. Many of them have Karaite origins, not all of them. There's actually some Orthodox Iraqi Jews. You can find, if you want to listen to their prayers, they're on YouTube. You can check it out. It's interesting to hear their unique dialect of Hebrew that they use in their worship services. But anyway, Karaitism, a brief introduction on what they are. They distinguish themselves as supremacy over the written tradition. In other words, the Torah, the Tanakh, anything is canonized in the Jewish Bible, which is also known as the Christian Old Testament. They are diametrically opposed to the opinionated aspects of rabbinical Judaism, in that the books of the Talmud and the Mishnah Torah and other things like that, essentially over a period of time became more authoritative than historical, in that they became a new variant of Jewish law or halakha. Well, the supporters of Karaite Jews were attracted to their focus on only Torah, only reading the Torah and only a logical deduction of what a sidra, what a verse meant, just through logical, analysis and things. You've heard before that the devil in the details, through true image truth, probably is the most simplest explanation. Okay, for instance, thou shalt not kill. You don't need to write 10 volumes to figure out what that means. Okay, you can see the intent is talking about you should not kill human beings. There's also prohibitions and mistreating animals as well. Okay, but kill and murder and things of that nature. You could write a lot of detailed, opinionated things, but anyway, you don't need to diverge too much from the Moshianic writings. And this is where the Karaite Jews stood fast and distinguished themselves among rabbinical Judaism, which is known as rabbinates. Now, the Karaite Jews established communities throughout the Byzantine Empire. Byzantine Empire essentially is the western part of the Holy Roman Empire. Eventually became that. There were various breakups in the Roman Empire. They broke out between Rome and Constantinople. The Byzantine was the Christianized part of that. So they lived throughout all those countries that were still under that loose control of the Holy Roman Empire. Also, the Crimean Peninsula, I mentioned this in part 2, had a very stable population there. But eventually, because of changes and wars and things of that nature, a new Russian president or dictator, they were driven from Crimea, which was essentially became sovereign territory of the Russian Empire in the 18th century. They went to where they could go, and it was Egypt. Egypt received them. There was a Jewish community in Cairo, Egypt at that time as well. And that's where I'm going to pick up in part 3. Now, a very famous photographer, about a year in 1948, I'm skipping a little bit, by the name of Ara Nowinski, he traveled to Egypt, he traveled to Israel by 1985. Now, through his efforts, in which he received accolades and various awards and everything else, I am very thankful that he actually took interest in Karaite Jews in Egypt, and he took interest with the community relationship between rabbinites and Karaite Jews living almost side by side in a small Jewish quarter in Cairo, Egypt, and elsewhere, maybe Alexandria as well. I'm not sure about the details of that, but I see Cairo mentioned predominantly, the capital of Egypt. Now, he learned that they were pretty much had a harmonious business relationship per se. They even were known to intermarry. So you would find in some cases, I don't know how often this occurred, but you would find a Karaite woman marrying a rabbinate man, and you would see this because they lived almost side by side in those communities. And because we're all considered Jews, Jewish brothers and sisters, they and under an Islamic caliphate at that time, they decided to try to put their confusion, their prejudices aside, at least for that time frame. It didn't last forever, because by the time of the 1967 war, it damaged relationships between the Jewish people of Israel, founding in 1948, the Sadat, the president of Egypt during that time. Of course, 1967 demonstrated itself, the Six-Day War in Israel, as a decisive victory over numerous Arab countries, including Egypt. And pretty much the Egyptians retaliated against the small 5,000 strong Karaite population in the Jewish quarter between Alexandria and Cairo, and it forced them to close their synagogues. Even leading up to 1964, in that time frame, discrimination was increasing. Islamic persecution of these minority Jews there was increasing to the point where, although rabbinate still had a lot of funding coming in for reconstruction and renovation of their synagogues. Well, the synagogues utilized by Karaite Jews fell, unfortunately, in disrepair. Even cemeteries, they can become overgrown very quickly if you don't have funding to take care of them. Sandstone, tombstones, and things of this nature would completely, disintegrate over a period of time as well if they were not replaced and refurbished and updated. So this is the kind of thing that this photographer captured in part, and there were many journalists during that time and historians as well that were observing us. Now, the byproduct of all of these environmental things of Jews living side by side, Karaite and Rabbinites together in Cairo over a period of time, I would say probably 100 years at least. In Egypt, 5,000 strong Karaite Jews. You have heard of in the Jewish quarter, the great synagogue, Ben-Emmett synagogue, was distinguished itself there, and also the initiative for the Yehuda El Magnus Museum was the end result of this photographer's input and contribution to that too, to preserve austerity and history of the Jewish people. When you discuss Jewish history, you should be apolitical, right? It should not be religious in nature, like Josephus, the most famous Jewish historian of all times, that was in Judea during that time of the close to the time of the Second Temple's destruction in 70 CE. Jewish historians are very important. They need to be accurate and astute. Some people are blamed for being political or left or right, depending on biases and things of that nature. But you can imagine that if we didn't have people like Mr. Lewinsky, we would not have a complete picture of Jewish history, during this critical time frame, I would say between the 12th and 15th and up to the 18th century, okay? So again, in the time of Lewinsky's visit, the ranks of Egyptian Karaites had dwindled, and again, the synagogues had fallen in disrepair. So it is probably likely, I cannot prove this, that Karaite left their synagogues, which were in disrepair, and probably compromised themselves and their Moshianic halakha to join rabbinates in their communities, so they can just have funding like for Pesach, for kosherut, for Jewish holidays and things of that nature. Well, eventually what happened is that in 1967, and again, Lewinsky chronologized these events that led to the exodus of these 5,000 Karaite Jews from Egypt. They went essentially into one or two places. Most of them, 35,000, was a population in Israel during the time of, I would say, 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. But 5,000 Karaite Jews went to Israel. Majority of them went to Israel and settled in Judea, but the rest of them, believe it or not, settled in San Francisco, California. This eventually became the headquarters of the American Karaite Federation organization, in which I submit contribution to every month, because I believe, as an American Jew, I believe I should contribute to them in some small way. Okay? So as a wrap up, if you go out there and ask how many Karaite Jews are in the world, you get a big difference in numbers of opinion. In fact, I've argued with some Karaite Jews that said there's only 35,000 Karaite Jews in the world today. That number is very conservatively low. 35,000 was probably the number maybe 10, 20 years ago. But there's at least, I would say, 1,000, maybe 1,300 in San Francisco, California, United States of America. I heard numbers up to maybe 50,000 worldwide now. Majority of all Karaite Jews, with a few exceptions, and maybe in France and Poland and other countries where they're dwindling is in Ashdod, the ancient Philistinian capital, the Philistines. Very interesting. I plan on moving my family there, hopefully within 7 to 8 years, as the Lord will. So, as a wrap up here, that Karaite Jews suffered the same negative consequences as other Jews living in the diaspora, as exiles, in Babylonia. But I want to point out quickly, before I forget, that throughout Byzantine Europe and some, under the leadership of some Islamic caliphates, like in Egypt, they survived at least 3 dynasties. If I'm wrong, please correct me. 3 Islamic dynasties, and Karaite Jews got along with the Muslims there. They really did. Why was that? Why did Karaite Jews get along better? During say 15th to 18th century in Egypt than their corresponding counterpart, rabbinites, people that were adhering to the oral tradition as codified in the Talmud. Why is that? Simply because Karaite Jews were ingenious enough to know that if you live in a pagan nation, if you live exiled from Israel, if you live underneath a foreign government, you're under their rules, right? So at some time, they learned, they said, if we're going to survive, we need to adopt some of the customs of these nations, like in Crimea in Russia, and like in Cairo and Alexandria in Egypt. In other words, wearing the clothes, wearing the yarmulke. They resembled Muslims in their dress and their appearance. So did Ramban for a brief period of time too, for his own survival. He wanted to get along with the Muslims at that time because they were in authority and their control, and he valued his Jewish life, right? So Karaite Jews had flourished in Egypt to the high number of 5,000, okay? But we've never had very large numbers. I hope to be increasing that population. I've joked with my new Karaite brothers and sisters worldwide on Facebook, and I'm in transition now. I'm in transition between Orthodox Judaism and Karaite Judaism. Finally, I made that decision to adopt the Karaite tribe and ask them to please adopt this Baal Teshuva Jew here. And I'm very happy about that. I want to contribute to the Karaite rich history, since the 8th century, or I'd say middle to late 8th century. I don't want to get in trouble. The Annites were dominated the 8th century. Toward the end of the 8th century, you started hearing words like Karaite Jews, but they still had shared the same problem with rabbinites, same as Annites, and other people like Rabbi Nachman, in conclusion, had similar problems with rabbinites too, in the strict legalistic way of worship. Remember, and I promise this is the conclusion, America was founded and we declared independence from the King of England. Some of the pilgrims, they were purists. They were very orthodox in their Christian faith, but the Church of England demanded the Anglican prayer as their de facto template of prayer, and they did not want to pray the way the king had dictated them. Folks, this is happening in Orthodoxy, unfortunately, today. We have a strict legalistic way of worship. When I say we, I've been part of Orthodoxy for at least 10 years. There's really very little room for inspiration. There's very little room for the Holy Spirit of God to manifest in so-called temple of the synagogue experience from my frame of reference. I hope it's different. I've been invited to join a Karaite synagogue. I don't think I ever will go to California. I'd probably go to Ashdod, Israel before I go anyplace else. Talking about kick the bucket list. Yeah, I want to spend the rest of my life in Ashdod. contributing, defending, and building up this minority sect of ancient Jews, so wonderfully sweet, that they love God so much that they take God from His Word verbatim. It's an amazing concept that Moses spent so much time and effort teaching tribal Israel through so many rebellions and plagues and everything else to accept the God of Israel and no one else. And He forbade the Jewish people from ever adding or subtracting to the Holy Torah. And you can look that up in Devarim chapter 3, I believe. It's something that rabbinates, they acknowledge what that said, but, they've created thousands of regulations under their variant of halakha. So this wraps up for now, until I found out more information, the brief synopsis and introduction of the roots of Karaite Jews from their very humble beginnings in the late 8th century all the way up to today, contemporary speaking. And they must be doing something right, because these numbers here from 35,000 to near 50,000, and I verified this at more than one site. I think even American Karaite Jewish sites advertise this number too. People are running to their doors. Why? Why? Because they're inclusive. You hear about the term equitarian. Don't get off with that term. You hear that in Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism. What it essentially says is whether you're a woman or man, you have the same right to the Torah as anyone else. That's a wonderful concept. You can pray with your wife if you want to. If you don't want to sit with your wife, you want to pray with the Brotherhood of Karaite men, you can do that too. The main point is that you learn the Torah. Learning and understanding the Word of God is their number one priority in Karaite synagogues around the world. Take care. ben-Emmett signing out in the edition of Torah Watchman Show. Please click subscribe, like, and for personal notify. And I will see you real soon. Remember, I'm here to tell you the truth, not my opinion, but based on my research and analysis. I'm a man of science. I have a master's degree in science. I made a GPA of 4, and I've written scientific papers in technical journals. And you cannot lie when you write these things, okay? I do not get rich from spreading propaganda, and I'm not out there to target Orthodox rabbis. I'm really not. What I want to do is be a truther and not a denier. And yes, my world is round and not flat. Take care, and God bless you.